All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Music Business Mondays. I am Sean Anthony, your host tonight, and Music Business Mondays is a virtual music conference series that will bring together well-connected industry executives. This includes record label reps, DJs, artists, and inspiring creatives to educate the next wave on how to thrive and advance in the entertainment industry. Up next, joining me first is Mr. Bruce Garfield. Bruce began his music business career as a pioneer in the field of band merchandising, signing licensing deals with superstars such as Led Zeppelin, Cream, Jimi Hendrix, The Doors, Rolling Stones. He went on to work at cutting-edge independent labels and record producers and was recruited by Capitol Records to head up and restructure the label's artist development and press departments. This appointment earned him the distinction of being the youngest national executive in Capitol Records history. Nominated 3 times as Billboard Magazine's Artist Development Executive of the Year, and he was promoted as Capitol's Vice President, A&R and Talent Acquisition. His continued success at Capitol earned him the opportunity to co-found Capitol's new Manhattan EMI Blue Note label. He has been essential to the career advancement of Natalie Cole, Duran Duran, Bob Seger, Steve Miller Band, The Motels, Grace Jones, and so many others, Bob McFerrin, and also the Blue Note label roster. As an artist manager, he guided the careers of Sinead O'Connor, Grace Jones, Isaac Hayes, War, Will Downing, Ziggy Marley, and Inner Circle, as well as consulting Disney, Macy's, EMI, and Universal Music. Being dedicated to nurturing young people, he has worked to further the missions of Grammy in the Schools, Little Kids Rock, and the Spirit of Harmony Project. He was also recognized by the United Nations for his vision and commitment to the Artists United Against Apartheid movement. He fell in love with Columbus, Ohio, and relocated in late 2017. Soon thereafter, Bruce Garfield was elected to be the first executive director of the Columbus Music Commission. And here he is now to help grow the careers of Columbus music makers and help build our music economy. Bruce Garfield, how art thou, sir?
I'm flattered, Sean. Thank you very much for that big intro. Man, I wish my daughter was watching. Thank you.
Bruce,
it's really great to be here.
Yeah, it's so good to have you on, man. With your level of experience and expertise, definitely we appreciate you sharing this platform today.
It's my pleasure. It's something I fall in love with Columbus, and we have a wonderful music community, and it's time for us to have our artists grow and become nationally recognized for the talent and the kind of city we are. So rather than talking about me, why don't you introduce our guest of honor, my very dear friend and monster talent. Go for it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Bruce. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to welcome among music legends, Nile Rodgers is truly exceptional. His legacy as a 3-time Grammy winning composer, producer, arranger, and guitarist is amplified by constantly traversing new music terrain and successfully expanding the boundaries of popular music. As the co-founder of Chic and the chairman of the Songwriters Hall of Fame, Rodgers pioneered a musical language that generated chart-topping hits like Le Freak, the biggest selling single in the history of Atlantic Records, and it sparked the advent of hip-hop with Good Times. Nile transcends all styles of music across every generation with a body of work that's garnered him inductions into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. How awesome is that? As well as the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Currently, Nile serves as the first ever chief creative advisor for the incomparable Abbey Road Studios. And he recently launched the critically acclaimed Apple Music One's Deep Hidden Meaning radio with Nile Rodgers. His unforgettable live performances with Chic have been included in festival best performances at both Glastonbury and Coachella, resulting in a BBC Music Awards nomination for Best Live Performance. The LA Times stating Nile Rodgers' influence stretches all over Coachella, beaming the sound of a better future. Nile's work in the Chic organization and his productions for artists like David Bowie, Diana Ross, and Madonna have sold over 500 million albums and 75 million singles worldwide, while his trend-setting collaborations with Daft Punk, Keith Urban, Eric Clapton, Grace Jones, Duran Duran, Sam Smith, and Lady Gaga reflect the vanguard of who this gentleman is. Without further ado, let's welcome the legendary Nile Rodgers. Nile, welcome to Music Business Mondays. How are you, sir?
Thank you. Very, very well. Nice to be here.
Bruce, this is a longtime friend of yours.
Right. I'll reserve commenting on how many years, but we've spent a lot of time together, and it's, a wonderful friendship. Last time I saw Nile, actually was in Columbus. Sheik was supporting Cher, and I think you played either the Schottenstein Center or the Arena. So it was pre-COVID, but we speak to each other frequently.
Yes, we do.
Now let's, we have a lot of viewers viewing virtually, and Music Business Mondays is set up for us to inspire and educate those that have aspirations of getting into the industry. At the genesis of your career, what nurtured the passion for your discovery of music?
I was always a music student from when I first started school at 6 years old. The standardized curriculum in America at that time was every school taught music. Certainly every school I went to. I studied music. I loved music. I learned how to compose. I was around really, really great jazz musicians my whole life because my parents were beatniks. And we lived in New York in the Greenwich Village scene. So music was just around me all the time. I couldn't avoid it, and I didn't want to.
Having that early influence in your life, transcending into the industry, what would you say was, compared to how the music industry is now for young aspiring artists trying to get in, what would you say it was the difference at the beginning of your career? How was it for you to get into the industry compared to how it is now? Was it easier or was it more difficult?
Well, I can't tell if it's easier or more difficult because I would have to be just starting out now, and I'm 68 years old. So, when I was younger, it felt like there were fewer pathways to making it in the business. As a Black musician, in New York, we really only had one viable radio station that could really change your career. There were smaller stations. You could have what we used to call in those days regional hits. But in order to really make it, you had to have a national hit and an international hit. And when you're a young musician, you learn from your friends or people around you, and they tell you certain little parables. And to you, those things can become the gospel. And what someone had told us was getting a hit record was like throwing a rock into a pond and it breaks in concentric circles. So we knew that we had to be on this radio station called WBLS in New York City. And we knew we certainly couldn't take our record right to Frankie Crocker and say, play this record. So what we did was we broke out of Pittsburgh on a station called Whammo. And Whammo was the first station to play our very first single. And lo and behold, what people told us was actually true. So it went from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, and Philadelphia is not far from New York. And it just so happened that a woman named Roxy Mizell was the new program director for a brand new station in New York City, that their format was like all disco all the time. And I guess they considered us all disco. And she was from Pittsburgh, and she got to New York. We went up to her station, which was called 99X, and we took her a birthday cake, and we did a little dance, a little whatever promotional schmooze. And and they added our record. The next thing you know, we put so much pressure on the big station that this little station in New York forced Frankie Crocker to go on our record. Next thing you know, we were national and then international.
That is so huge. Bruce, I know you want to jump in and ask some questions, but I have to ask this follow-up. You know, I'm a radio head. I've been in the game for a long time. So you mentioned some legendary stations and some legendary radio personalities, BLS in New York and Whammo in Pittsburgh. That's amazing. Share a little bit to the aspiring artists out there how important radio is, because, you know, now we live in the digital age, and, you know, a lot of young people may say, well, nobody listens to radio, you know, there's all of these streaming sources. But, you know, being in the radio industry and with your experience, can you speak on how important radio is to the music industry?
Well, certainly when I started, radio was everything. And there were different ways to influence radio. Clubs were becoming really hot. DJs had their own captive audience. So this was before we actually had DJ pools and the record companies. Bruce is probably one of the people who really saw how important this was. And the record companies, the labels started to develop ways of tapping into the DJs and their audience, because they were good barometers to project what the next trend of the next cool thing would be. So, but it was all about radio in the beginning. And, you know, even though we had clubs playing our music, nothing really changed until after Whammo picked us up. And then the next week, WDAS in Philadelphia picked us up. And then we went right from there. A guy named Butterball was all over our record. And then Butter, you know, somehow Roxy Mizell was like, well, Butter's on your record. Yeah. She jumped on it in New York City. And next thing you know, Frankie Crocker was forced. I think what happened was, you know, in the old days, they used to say the telephones light up, right? So what happened was, you know, our first record, and a lot of people criticize me. They say that our first record wasn't what I like to call not really gimmick records, but novelty records. So, you know, our first record had yowza, 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 I want to boogie with you. And we had gotten this from the movie They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Jane Fonda movie. And we thought that the 12-inch single had just came out. So it represented a dance marathon in one record to me. Like all of a sudden, your records were no longer 3 minutes long. You can make a record that was 14 minutes long, 15 minutes, 9 minutes, 10 minutes. So if you look at the first part of my career, every big hit record that I had on an album was the longest record, because we wanted to give the fans a bonus. We gave them the 12-inch version of the record on the album. And this was our pattern all the way up until I wound up doing Like a Virgin. So David Bowie had it, Sister Sledge had it, Diana Ross had it, Chic had it, Norma Jean had it. I mean, we did it on every record.
Wow. Oh my gosh, I have so many questions. But Bruce, I know you got to chime in, man. Go ahead, Bruce.
I was just interested now when you started, you know, and I know your dad was a big influence. He was a musician. Did you have in your mind that I want to be a famous musician, or I want to play? And was there a plan, or did you just fall into the flow and go?
Yeah, I just wanted to play. I because I grew up with music history, I understood that once you committed to being a musician, you were really committing to being poor. So I was cool with being poor. I looked up all the great masters, and I saw that, you know, and I'm talking classical music now. So most of the great masters were poor or wound up poor. Only a handful really were rich. And basically you were contracted to do something for a lord or a king or a pope or things like that. But musicians were poor, and I sort of knew I was going to be poor. My dad, who, though he never became famous, was not really poor in the ghetto sense, because he had a day job and he was the only black musician that that the Paul Whiteman Orchestra allowed to play with his band. Paul Whiteman was famously called the King of Jazz, which is funny, but he had that moniker, and he wore it like a red badge of courage. And my dad worked in Philadelphia when the Paul Whiteman Orchestra became the house band for some television show. I don't remember the name of it, but it turned into American Bandstand. And the day that I was born, my dad was actually playing on that show that would morph into American Bandstand.
Wow.
Wow.
What an in-home inspiration.
I'm sorry.
When you first signed to Atlantic, I mean, how were you knocking on their door? How did they find you? How did you find them?
That was a weird story, bro. So we actually were signed to a label called Buddha first. And and we signed to Buddha, and because we were young, we didn't have an attorney. And in those days, we didn't have an attorney because we were young. We didn't have an attorney because we were poor. But in those days, in New York State, you could sign a contract without an attorney. So what we did was, in our negotiations with Buddha, we said, look, our biggest opportunity is to be part of this thing called the Billboard First Annual Disco Convention or something like that. And they were going to promote this new style of music, disco. And we wanted to be a part of that. So we took our 12-inch record over there, and we were on Buddha. And this was the concept, supposedly, that we were going to take our 12-inch over to the first disco convention. But we found out before the disco convention happened that a gentleman named Art Cass, who was the head of the label, hadn't paid his bills. And so that they were not going to be able to service all of the DJ booths that were going to be set up at the Plaza Hotel. I think it was the Plaza Hotel. It was the Plaza Hotel. And so we got terrified. We're like, oh my God, nobody's going to hear our record. And this is what you call real record men. So a guy who worked for Buddha Records was begging Art Cass, look, please, Art, you got to get this record out. It's a smash. You know, when you're a real record man and you really feel like you have a hit, you know, you sell your house, you do anything, because they're rare. And he said, look, we gotta be right by these guys. One, they put it in the contract that we need to break them at this event. So they reneged, and this guy named Tom Kazi left his vice president position at Buddha and went over to Atlantic Records. And the funny thing is that he went to the president of Atlantic Records. He didn't fool around with the A&R department, because we had already told him that Atlantic had turned us down at least 15 times. We had tried to get different people who said that they were promoters and agents and managers to take us to Atlantic, because in New York, especially if you were a black musician, your focus was either Atlantic or Columbia. And we used to say, okay, we're going across the street, because they were across the street from each other at that time. And those were the two labels that we cared about, was either we were going to be on Atlantic, that Warner family, but Atlantic felt more New York than Warner Brothers, the label. And that's all we cared about. Either we're going to be on Atlantic or CBS. And Tom Kazi went over, he spoke to a gentleman named Jerry Greenberg, and he said, Jerry, I just want you to listen to this record. He played it for him one time. And according to Tom, because I wasn't at this particular meeting, Jerry just scratched his head and went, oh my God, Kaz, this record's a smash. And he says, yeah, but Art Cass already has these guys signed, but he's broken the deal. So what can you do, Jerry? The disco convention is coming up Monday, and we need to have records at the disco convention. So what they did was, it's total true story. They flew the test pressing, which we had to make from a generation down. They flew it out to their plant in Pennsylvania called Presswell. They made records all over, throughout the weekend, got the helicopter, flew it back to the east side, to the east side helicopter terminal. And then they distributed records all up and down the eastern seaboard. So when those DJs went to the first annual disco convention, they would have this record by this group called Chic or Chick, whatever they were calling us, called Dance, 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 Yowza, Yowza, Yowza. And it had an Atlantic label on it. Buddha couldn't afford to press, so they didn't have anything except a couple of white labels. And the Atlantic record, which is a generation down, which obviously you guys know in those days, that meant a lot. It doesn't sound nearly as good as the Buddha version, but that was still good enough because it was in the grooves, and it came out, and everybody, when it hit the radio, when it hit the airwaves, the radio, the telephones lit up, the nightclubs, just everybody had to have it. And the DJs were delivered the record by limousine. So it was a special kind of promotion. The DJs felt, oh, and the one thing you got to remember, see, Bernard and I were very smart. We didn't have any money, so we tried to use every little R&B trick we could think of. I used to play in the Apollo Theater house band after I played for Sesame Street. I also was working with Luther Vandross. I was in Luther's band, and we noticed that at the Apollo, whenever an artist came and the artist was a one-hit wonder, they'd use a device they would break down and talk to the audience so they could stretch out the song as long as possible. So we decided it was so effective in real life, why don't we try this on our records? So our records would break down. So half of the reason why nobody wanted Dance, Dance, Dance is because in the middle of the song, we just go, dance, 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 dance. And everybody at the radio station, at the record label said, but when this happens on the radio, people are going to think that the record stopped. They're going to freak out. They're going to not play it. And we said, no, it's called a breakdown. I promise you, people are going to love it. And that's what happened. And then we got the DJ from Studio 54. We paid him $500 to put his name on the record and say that he mixed it. The guy never mixed a record in his life, but we knew that Studio 54 was the center of the disco universe. So people picked up the record and said, oh, Tom Severese from Studio 54 mixed this. We got to see what he's playing, which helped us go international.
Amazing stories.
It shows you that here's some lessons. 1, use an attorney. 2, never give up. And 3, be inventive. Because people I know, being a major label guy for years, I always gravitated to something that was a little different, someone that wasn't following everybody else, someone that was left of center. And I think that's, to a great extent, the main theme, or one of the main themes of your career and story. That's a wonderful story.
That's probably why you and I get along so well. When Bruce, I call him Garf, when Garf hired me, he hired me to do Grace Jones. Grace Jones was instrumental in my career because she called us up out of the clear blue sky one day. And of course, Grace Jones was like the biggest star we could have ever imagined, even though we had nothing but hit records. Like our first record was platinum because we went gold on 2 labels. We went gold on Buddha and Atlantic. Wow. Our second single was a gold single. Our next single was a platinum single. Then the next single was a double platinum single. Then we had eventually we wound up getting a triple platinum single on Atlantic with Freak Out. And we cut off our sales at almost 8 million. And we don't even know what they really sold because in those days, they accounted to us for 7 point whatever million. But we used to go to record stores and see cutouts in the stores and know that we weren't getting accounted to for that. So, we had nothing but hit singles, one after the next. So when Grace Jones called us, it was because of our second single, which was an underground record called Everybody Dance. And she called us up, and I had never spoken to Grace Jones. So I didn't really know what her speaking voice was like. I just knew her singing voice, time to get down on your knees, or something like that. But her speaking voice was like, so darling, what I want you to do. She wanted us to possibly produce what would have then been her next album. So she told us that the only way we could truly understand who she was as an artist was to see her live show, which to me was really impressive that a person would say that. So she says, so darling, what you do is you come to the back door and then you tell them that you are personal friends of Miss Grace Jones. That's sort of what the accent sounded like to us. And we thought it was like a cross between Bela Lugosi, Bob Marley and Marlena Dietrich. So we're knocking on
all I'm visualizing right now is the Grace Jones and Boomerang, the Eddie Murphy classic movie.
So we're trying to put on this accent because we think that it's a fake accent, but that's how the person's going to know that it's really us. So we're going, hello, we are personal friends of Miss Grace Jones. And the guy goes, F off, slams the door in our faces. And we go, no. We start kicking the door really loudly because it's Studio 54. The music is booming inside. So to get the person's attention, you really have to make a lot of noise. And finally, the guy opened the door in a huff and said, didn't I tell you to F off? So we knew we weren't going to get in. Fortunately, my apartment was right around the corner. The back door of Studio 54 was on 53rd Street between 8th Avenue and Broadway. And my apartment was on 52nd Street between 8th Avenue and 9th Avenue. And we passed the liquor store before we got to my apartment. We bought 2 bottles of what we used to call rock and roll mouthwash. Bruce knows this. Rock and roll mouthwash, Dom Perignon. And we went to my apartment. And we were pissed off because this is New Year's Eve now, going in 77, going into 70. We were pissed off. We like, man, come on, man. Center of the disco universe. We want to be a part of this. And we just swigged it down real fast. And we started singing, F off. F Studio 54. F off. And we got into it. And we thought of every possible scenario where the only appropriate answer would be F off. And as songwriters, we really developed it, did a little bridge, the whole bit. And my partner, Bernard, looked at me and said, my man, this shit is happening. And I'm like, man, we can't get F off. We can't get that on the radio. Come on. And this is like 2 years before hip hop. I was like, come on, we're not going to get this on the radio. So we started to think of these different euphemisms for F-U blank K off. And we said freak off. And for some reason, that just didn't do it. And I grew up as a hippie. So, we took LSD and the whole bit. And I started thinking about tripping. And I went, oh, man, how about like when you freak out, man, you have like a bad trip. And Bernard is a brother from the South. He had no idea what I was talking about. And he looked at me and went, what? And I caught myself real quick. I got my Black Union card back real quick and said, no, when you see a fly sister and you're on the dance floor and you're doing that new dance called the freak, which my girlfriend was an expert at doing. And then Bernard said a light bulb went off. And he says, yeah, my kids are talking about that dance too. Boom. So we wrote a record about a dance we didn't really know how to do. We went to, what was the joint? We went to Colony Records. And we got 2 records to use as a blueprint for this song that we were going to write about a dance. We got Chubby Checkers, Come On Baby, Let's Do the Twist. And we got Joey D and the Starlighters, the Peppermint Twist. We went back to my apartment. We listened to both these records. And the interesting thing about both these records, which were #1 records, was neither of these records taught you how to do the dance. So we wrote a song about a dance we didn't know how to do. So we couldn't teach you how to do it, even though we said, allow us, we'll show you the way. Freak out. And we don't show you the way. We just go, freak out. And the freak say chic.
Man, what an amazing story on how that classic, iconic song was developed. I have a million and one follow up questions, but I'll digress real quick. The niece of Norma Jean Wright is on the live watching and commenting. So
Oh,
um,
cool.
people in the back wanted me to let you know that. Um, Real quick, because I do have follow up questions, about your songwriting process. You mentioned Luther Vandross. You mentioned Like a Virgin, but real quick about this disco era. This was completely new in the music industry. Can you speak briefly on the climate of the music industry right at that time, and you coming out with this new innovative sound? Obviously, that they were hit songs, but it was a new trend that was developed during that time period. Can you speak to that and creating a new sound?
Yeah, well, so you got to remember, music is the type of art form where we really borrow from each other. And at that time, I really saw myself as a jazz musician. And I happened to notice that for the first time in my lifetime, jazz musicians were really starting to get pop R&B hit records. Like Herbie Mann had Hijack, Roy Ayers had, a couple of records, Running Away and My Life in the Sunshine, and Norman Connors had You Are My Starship. And I'm like, oh, wow. Um, uh, Joe Beck and God, I played with her. Had What a Difference a Day Makes, and they big hit records, but they were like dance records, and I was like, whoa, this is incredible. It felt like this disco movement was inviting, and it just opened like the doors were open to anybody who had a record that would make you get on the dance floor. And the DJs were the gatekeepers. They were the ones who figured out what songs are going to make my crowd dance. And sometimes they would be obscure little groove records. Other times they'd be records that were really popular on the radio. We happened to write this obscure little groove record called Everybody Dance. And it's cool that Norma Jean's niece is on, because we did that record as instrumental with just the chorus. That was with Luther Vandross. And when we finally got a record deal, after we had our hit with Dance, 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 they asked us if we had anything else. And we said, well, yeah, we have this underground hit. And we hired Norma Jean to actually sing the lead on Everybody Dance, which is why her voice isn't on the chorus. Like, she just sings, music never lets you down, because we had already had the record out. I mean, people were dancing to it. But once we had to formalize it and make it into a proper song and not just sort of an underground, groove track, we had to form a real band. And that real band we named Chic. We were originally called the Big Apple Band, believe it or not, because we were the backup group for a band called New York City. And they had a hit record called I'm Doing Fine Now, beep, 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 without you, baby. And we toured all around the world with New York City. And it was New York City, and we were the backup group, the Big Apple Band. So we had developed a following around town as the Big Apple Band. And we kept that name until a friend of mine that went to music school with me did a record called A Fifth of Beethoven. And he called his band Walter Murphy and the Big Apple Band. And because we all went to Manhattan School of Music, everybody thought that was our Big Apple Band, but in fact, it was Walter's, and we had to change our name.
Now, you mentioned Luther Vandross twice. I want to ask, you said you played with his band.
Yeah.
Can you give us a sneak peek into what it was like working with Luther Vandross behind the scenes? Because, reading as a music fan, period, I love reading the credits, like who wrote, who produced, who did this, that, and the third. And from my understanding, Luther did a lot of songwriting and also collaborating. But what was it like working with Luther? Can you tell us a little bit, maybe some stories that the public has never known about Luther Vandross?
Yeah, it was great. Luther, so in our little clique, and most musicians have little cliques. Musicians that you play with all the time, if you get the job, you hire them because they're going to help you make your money, because you know that they're professional and that they're really good. So in our little circle, my little high school friends, Luther Vandross was always the person who won the talent show, right? So we always knew that, okay, if there's a talent show, we know Luther's going to win, big deal. So he was the first one to actually get a record deal. Believe it or not, Luther was signed to Atlantic Records and did 2 albums on Atlantic Records. David Bowie, when David Bowie picked up Luther for his vocal group, the Young Americans, one of the songs that Luther had already written on his album is called Funky Music, but on David Bowie's album, Young Americans, it's called Fascination. It's the exact same song, but they just changed the lyrics. So I worked on Luther's second album, which was called Luther, and it didn't really net any big hits. At the same time, he was still big enough to gig. So we were doing Radio City, and in those days, as Brew knows, Radio City, you had to do 2 shows a night. At the Apollo, we had to do 3 and 4 shows sometimes. So Radio City, we did a show, and then we'd have intermission. During the intermission, they'd turn the house over. That's when we cut our first hit record. We ran to a recording studio, and for the huge price of $15, we recorded Everybody Dance. And Luther, since I was in his band, I said, yo, Luther, come over and sing with us. And he sang for free. And we cut Everybody Dance. And that was the beginning of Chic as a recording act. And then we ran back and did our second show at Radio City.
Wow. You guys must have really been polished to in between intermission to run to a recording studio, knock out a song, and come back and perform again.
Well, guess what, my brother? We knocked out 3 songs.
Wow. For $15.
For $15, yep.
Oh, my goodness. Bruce, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, you're known for your unique style of playing and your sound as a writer and a producer. But today, there's so many young people making music at home. And I know that through my career, I've met with artists, listened to music they've done by themselves. And then the major difference when they've had their arm bent to work with a producer, but there's sometimes such resistance to doing it. What's your take on an artist, as an artist, and what a producer will add? And perhaps tell us one of your favorite stories of being in the studio with an artist as a producer.
Well, sometimes the producer doesn't really help. The way that we became producers, believe it or not, is we had a super famous guy come in to produce our first few songs when we were the Big Apple Band. What happened is because of our style of playing, he couldn't help but get caught up into our playing style, and he tried to compete with us. You can't compete with Bernard Edwards. I mean, just forget that move. But so the way that Bernard and I play together is just a magical thing. We would just lock it. It would just groove. And this piano player came in and just tried to outdo us. It's like, no, man, come on, make our songs. Don't try and show us that you're better than us. That's not a producer's job. But he couldn't help it, I guess. And so, sometimes a producer is terrific for an artist. Sometimes they could be, just, I won't say detrimental, but sometimes they just don't quite get it right. I've been lucky in that experience happened to me at the beginning of my career, and it taught me that I wound up being the producer by default, because once this guy left, everybody then played the song the way I wanted it to be played, and that was the right way. But look, I've done records, and let me give you something recent so you'll really be able to understand. So when Daft Punk brought me in to do Random Access Memories. I'm the only producer and writer that's got 3 songs on that album, which is their biggest album in history. You know, they were working on that album for 8 years. And when I came into the studio, they didn't know that the very first Chic hit record was cut at Electric Lady Studios. So they were at Electric Lady, and I just happened to say, just casually, I said, "Hey, Thomas, you know, you're standing right where Bernard Edwards was standing when we cut Dance, Dance, Dance." And he looks at me and went,
Wow.
"We cut Dance, Dance, Dance here? I thought you did every record at the power station." We said they were building the power station when we cut our first record. And then it became a hit. And at that point, the power station was almost finished. And then we did everything else there. But we first started at Electric Lady. And they went, "Really?" And they're huge Chic fans. Huge. I mean, you look at the first Daft Punk record and you open it up and you look at the gatefold and you see a Chic records on the floor of all the records that they like. So they asked me, they said, "Well, how do you make Chic records?" And I said, "Well, play me the songs that you want me to play on." And they played me the first song. And I said, "Do me a favor." I wrote out the chart and says, "Now cut everybody and just let me play to the drums. I don't want to hear what the other guys are playing." Now, don't get me wrong. They're all friends of mine. They're great musicians, but they didn't have the pocket that I thought the song should have. So I played the part. And then I said, and now typically with Chic, what I do to accentuate that part so that you really hear it, I'll double it, but I'll just double it with like a couple of notes just to make the part, to give it a just sort of accent, almost like when you see rappers rapping and you see the other person come on and just like sort of
Ad lib.
Exact punch words, right? So they'll say, you know, like, you know, they come in and just do that kind of thing. So that was my guitar style. I would just sort of come in and play these punchy parts to accentuate the rhythm of the real part. So I did that with the first song I worked on was Get Lucky. And then I said, now once I get that down, then I add a single note part that's a little melodic part that you can add or take away, whatever you want. And that actually became the melody of the song. My single note part goes and that became Get Up All Night to Get Lucky. And
monster hit.
It was not called Get Lucky when I played that, I guarantee you.
You are dropping so many phenomenal jewels, and I'm sure the viewers are really appreciating it. Somebody made a comment just recently, what I was thinking, you know, about being in that pocket. That's important as a musician, you know, to get in that pocket and writing, being in that right spot melodically, you know, just nuggets after nuggets after nuggets, man. This is fascinating. Yeah, the pocket is so crucial. Can you speak on your songwriting process? I know you've mentioned, you know, how several songs came about, but like when you get a call from like Grace Jones or a Madonna, you know, Diana Ross, like you mentioned, Like a Virgin, what is your songwriting process when you have people tapping you, say, "Hey, you know, can you come in and, you know, work some magic for me"? What's that process like?
Honestly, it's different every time. My the way that I think of my job is I think that I'm working to help my artist actualize their vision. That's really what my job is. Now, a lot of producers believe that the way they work and that what their job is just write a person's, you know, a great song for a person. That's not how I produce. I talk to the person. I try and become a fan. I want to know their history. I want to know everything about them. I'm working with an artist now, and I told her last weekend, I said, "Okay, I have studied everything you've done. I've seen every live show. I've seen every review. I can actually quote you all the bad reviews and all the great reviews because that's how much I've studied you." Because she told me where she wanted to go with this next record. And I was hired not only to do her album, but she's just finishing up a film, and she wanted me to do a remix of the song that she's featured on in the film. So, you know, that was, to me, that was sort of easy, but I also made sure that I was connecting it to the bigger vision. Like, where do you want to go? I always say to an artist that I don't want to make your last record. I want to make your next record. And, you know, the case of someone like a Diana Ross, you know, we sort of accidentally learned how to write for Diana Ross. What had happened was we were coming off of a huge record with Sister Sledge. Now, remember, before we did Diana Ross, every record we put out was a hit. We didn't have a record that was not a hit, even though it was, you know, just all unknown people. It was, you know, it was Chic. It was Norma Jean. Norma Jean's record was a gold album. I mean, you know, for a brand new artist, that was no slouch. So we got her a gold album on a label like Bearsville, which was not known for having R&B and dance records. But every record we put out, we had a hit single. So what happened was when we did the We Are Family album, we knew that the song We Are Family was so good that if we put that out first, no one would hear the rest of the album. And we thought that the Sister Sledge album was the best canon of songs that we could ever write on one album. That's the album that has Lost in Music, He's the Greatest Dancer, you know, Thinking of You, We Are Family. I mean, just every song is amazing on that album. And we were terrified that the record label was going to force us to put out We Are Family. Thank God the label was finally believing in us, and we only dealt with the president because just no one understood us, but the president believed in us, and we wrote this song called He's the Greatest Dancer. And we didn't know that Sister Sledge, that Kathy, who was the main lead singer, was 16 years old, a virgin, and really religious. We had no idea, but we knew all about the disco scene. We know, and I've checked this out historically, we were the first people to name check designers. Like up until then, the only things that were name checked were things like cars. It was like, you know, crazy about my Mercury, driving along in my automobile, you know, whatever. They never talked about fashion designers. So we were the first people to write Halston, Gucci, Fiorucci. Now you can't buy a pop record without them talking about Fendi. This, man, it's like, right. We did it on one song, but now every pop record's got this. My Lamborghini rolling, my, you know, it's like, stop. But so we name checked fashion designers, but really what the song He's the Greatest Dancer was about this girl having a one night stand with this guy. And she says in the lyric, Kathy, the 16-year-old virgin who's ultra religious, and her mom was the manager, had to sing a lyric that says, "My creme de la creme, please take me home." And they freaked out on us. They were like going, wait a minute, why can't it be "My creme de la creme, please don't go home"? And we went, no, that changes the whole, that changes the whole vibe. It's He's the Greatest Dancer. It's about him. He is so amazing. You don't want him to leave this club without you. And, you know, you got to give it up for him. And that's it, because he's that guy. He had the kind of body that would shame Madonna and a face that would make any man proud. Oh, wow, he's the greatest dancer that I've ever seen. So they were really upset about this lyric, and they wouldn't back down, and we wouldn't back down. We had artistic control. We're the ones with the hit records. So we weren't tyrants, but we wanted them to get a hit, and we wanted them to reflect the lifestyle that was happening now. They didn't know who Halston was. They never even heard of these fashion designers. They certainly didn't know Gucci. And in Philly, there is no store called Fiorucci. To them, it was like speaking Greek. But we just said, just please do what we tell you to do. And I'll never forget this. Kathy and I have become lifelong friends because of this one thing she asked me. You know, her mother was freaking out, the sisters were freaking out, but she pulled me aside and says, Nile, do you think this song is going to be on the radio? and I lied. I'm a journeyman. I have no idea, but I go, Kathy, absolutely it's going to be on the radio. Because Sister Sledge had done records before, but they could never get on the radio. I said, I promise you, it's going to be on the radio. And I'll never forget this 16-year-old girl on her way to school calling me up one morning going, oh my God, Nile, it's on the radio. And that was the beginning of Sister Sledge becoming international, not just local, international.
Like a Virgin, talk about your collaboration with that, with Madonna.
Yeah, so what was interesting about Madonna, believe it or not, I was not going to the club to see Madonna. I was going to the club to see this girl named Jenny Burton. And Jenny Burton was the lead singer in a group. Oh my God, what was that group? So the dance music was changing into a style that was called, it had three names. It was called either electro, Latin hip hop, or God, what was it? Like Lisa and the Cult Jam, like that style of music. Lisa the Cult Jam, the Jets, those kind of that kind of groove. And so I was going to see Jenny because she was the lead singer of this really cool electro band. I can't remember the names, but I knew Jenny was a star. So I went to see Jenny, and the opening act was Madonna, and I had known Madonna's boyfriend, Jelly Bean Benitez, and Jelly Bean is Puerto Rican, and I assumed Madonna was Puerto Rican. So I go to the club to see Jenny, and all of a sudden this white girl comes out with two dancers and starts singing, everybody, come on, dance and sing. Everybody, come on and do your thing. And I'm like looking at her going, we don't dance anymore. Black artists, we don't do that now. Now the black artists are we're all now trying to be sort of like the cool, suave artists. We, you know, that was for the old R&B groups that were doing steps, like the Temps. We know now we're like the Isley Brothers. We stand around and be cool and profile. You know, no. But she's out there stepping, and she's out there dancing and doing the Weibo and blah, blah, blah. Everybody come. And we're like, no, don't do that. And I remember the guy that I was with, he was a brother, and we were like offended. We thought that, like, boy, talk about usurping our stuff. We don't even do that, and you're doing that. But then there was something cool about this white girl stepping. It was like, well, I mean, she's making a point. And so I went backstage to meet her because I knew she was Jelly Bean's girlfriend. And we talked, and somehow we really got along, because Madonna, even before she made it, was pretty tough, but we got along. And she was going to meet with her label, which was Sire Records, out in California the following week after she and I had met. And the two producers that Warner Brothers thought were really hot, that would be great for her, were either Narda, Michael Walden, or myself. But she had already met me. She didn't meet Narda yet. She met me, gravitated towards me, and she went there to tell them that Nile was producing her record. She didn't go there to discuss it. She went there to inform them. And they were like going, but, you know, and Narda was coming off big records. And they were like, you know, Madonna is an immovable object. So she went there and told him, oh no, I've already chosen my producer. I met this guy, Nile Rodgers, and everybody keeps telling me he's a genius, and I want a genius to produce my record, period, end of story. And man, that's how we hooked up. It was just a chance meeting, and I wasn't even going to see her. And it's funny, I didn't wind up working with Jenny Burton until years and years later. And I worked with her in a film that didn't really do well. Most of the films that I do don't do well. The only really big ones that I've had have been Coming to America, which was huge. and Thelma and Louise did well. But most films that I do are pretty much bombs. But I still have fun doing them.
Your flex, your stunting is so just iconic. The way that you flex on your accomplishments. Yeah, I did this, I did that, I did that. Iconic.
I work all the time. I'm 68 years old now, and if I took you up to the studio and showed you the whiteboard of all the projects I have that hopefully I'll get done before the end of this year, your head would spin around. You would not believe the amount of albums, the amount of singles. I'm opening up some spots. We'll just call them entertainment places, I can't give it away too much, but opening up, we'll call it clubs. And I got a crazy schedule for the rest of this year. And as Bruce pointed out, I will probably be Cher's opening act when we play in America for the rest of my life, as long as I can do it. Cher and I, it's a great 1-2 punch. The fact that we have an audience that every song we play, they know, and we're the opening act. It's fantastic.
Awesome.
I have a question now before we get into some of the questions about today, young artists and making it. You, as a teenager, I read that you were a member of the Black Panther Party, and of course, we're not too far difference in age, and we grew up in the '60s, the early '70s, civil rights movement, anti-Vietnam War. Generations speaking.
Mm-hmm.
You've always stood up for social justice and to make the world a better place and use your platform. Can you tell us a little bit about the We Are Family Foundation and what you do with as a TEDx teen and 3 Dash? And also, this is a complex question about artists standing up. Artists used to speak up and rally people to a cause and to really speak about social injustice or be leaders. And I find there's a vacuum today that artists seem in general, it's a grossly general statement, that they don't use their platform. They're more interested in having hits. So,
yes, some are, but I do honestly feel a change, Brew. So you're right. I was brought up, my parents were beatniks. We lived in the village. So I was socialized to care about other people. That's just how it was. I mean, before I joined the Black Panther Party, man, I was in so many organizations that were there to just help people who my mom would always say, who were less fortunate than we. And I would say, who could be less? We are the poorest people in the world. And she said, no, there are people who are poorer than us. So I just was socialized to care. So by the time I started, let me just give you the quick progression. So I was, parents are beatniks. I was a hippie, went from a hippie to a peacenik, went from a peacenik to anti-Vietnam War, because it was like, wait a minute, I'm going to get drafted? Are you kidding me? Now, I was born in 1952, which happens to be a leap year. And even though my birthday is September 19th, because it was one of these it was a draft system. And I'm sorry, it was a lottery system. And so a friend of mine who was actually born on February 29th, 1952, his number came up like number 6. But my birthday on September 19th came up like, 255 or so. I wasn't going to be drafted. And but in New York, we came from a very sort of political kind of upbringing where it was just natural for for the scene. Um, so I think because I've always been into um, activism, I see so many kids right now that are on the forefront. As a matter of fact, in my organization, we have a new group of kids that we call frontliners, and we actually fund them and help them with their mission statements. We actually, it's hard if you're not a big NGO to get bank loans and things like that. So with our frontliner program, that's what we do. We actually give them bank loans. They're not even loans. We don't even ask for the money back. We give them grants. So there are, the youth are really changing. I mean, I look at it like this, Bruce. When I started out, somebody told me that the biggest consumers of music were girls ages blah, 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 like 12 to so-and-so. So I always tried to go out and look for those girls to join my group. I mean, if you remember the beginning of Chic, we had more girls in the band than guys. And I always thought that if I always had, girls around me as musicians and composers and what have you, they would help me stay focused to sell the most amount of records. That if you look at my career, all of my first big records were all for women. It was, Chic, Norma Jean, Sister Sledge, Diana Ross. I mean, we didn't get to a guy until we broke up and I did David Bowie. But up until then, it was all women, all girls. And so the analogy, what I was going to talk to you about is that, so even though I tried to look for those girls, they were intimidated in the old days by the gear. I mean, think about it. You walk into a recording studio, it looks like the cockpit of a 747 to most people. Nowadays, because they grow up on computers, the women I work with are some of the best producers and writers I've ever seen because they're no longer intimidated by the gear. They're like open up the computer and right away they're like going, okay, boom, I got Pro Tools, I got there's so many different platforms that they can write on. And my job now is actually, I got to tell you, when I work with women and even young girls, they're not even women yet, songwriters, they do their own production. Like I'll work with them on the song and I'll come back the next day and it's all fixed up and it's like they got harmonies written and everything, and they say, hey, why don't you play this part on guitar? And they'll play the part on piano. I mean, it's a whole different world. So I actually think that the youth of America are starting to get inspired because it's not just about music now. They're starting to understand inequality. They're starting to understand it. And I think that, George Floyd is going to be remembered in history the same way we remember Malcolm X, the same way we remember Martin Luther King, not, because the same type of thing happened, but because all of those people move the masses. George Floyd moved the masses around the world.
It sparked something
around the world. I mean, I travel. I have 1 million miles on three different carriers. That's how much I fly, and I've gone to countries that you would never think that they have enough people to have Black Lives Matter, but you go there and they're like Black Lives Matter demonstration. They're huge, and basically what they're saying is that they recognize not just the racism and the injustice as a result of racism and slavery in America, but all around the world. I mean, this is happening everywhere. And, you know, I'm really hoping, Bruce, I feel I'm the kind of person that's really optimistic, as you well know. And I'm really hoping that things start to change, because it's horrible. I don't think that, you know, we got to wake up. I mean, I've been to countries that the level of poverty and inequity and violence and rape and killing of women and young people is just, it's extraordinary. I mean, you can't believe what's going on. So I'm thinking that the same way technology has helped create new young people that are no longer afraid to produce on their own. They're no longer afraid to write on their own. I hope you guys aren't hearing that.
Oh, yes, we are.
It's my manager. He's being relentless. He's got something important to tell me. Like I said, we got so many records. It's crazy. Stop already.
Oh, you mean Merck is known for being relentless? My goodness.
I'm trying to decline. Okay, got it. Shoot, sorry about that, gents.
That's okay. We're not going to keep you much longer. We really appreciate this, and I'm sure all of the fans that are watching virtually appreciate these stories that you're sharing. These are such gems. Can we talk about you being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? I mean, you have this just fantastic career, and you're still going. You're still writing and producing records, but being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Can you speak on that, Nile?
Yeah, though, you know, that's been like, I don't make a huge deal out of awards and stuff. And it's funny, you hear me say that and you see all these like platinum and gold records on the wall. The main reason, it's funny, the main reason why I did that was because once I decided that, okay, this is going to be my main recording studio other than Abbey Road, when artists came here, I didn't want them to feel like, we just come into his house to record. I wanted to make them feel like, no, you're coming to a real studio and we get it done. So being, you know, inducted into Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it was sort of bittersweet because I was there at the beginning of that organization. And it's, you know, I think that to me, a real Hall of Fame should be based on accomplishment and influence. So like, you know how when you're watching a sport and you'll hear the person say, there's a future Hall of Famer there. There's a future Hall of Famer there. And why do they say something like that? Because the person has performed, they get, you know, whatever, 100 points a season or whatever, or 55 home runs or 60 home runs. So they know that just that level of accomplishment will assure their place in the Hall of Fame. They know it for a fact because it's based on accomplishment and influence. So even if the person didn't break Babe Ruth's record, but maybe they did something else that changed the face of a game, that changed the way they thought about it, or the way that it was played, people wind up being in the Hall of Fame. You don't have to actually be the player. You could be a manager and wind up being in the Hall of Fame. So it's a strange thing for me because, you know, I certainly know my band, Chic, was a major influence on people. And the fact that I'm in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame by myself because I've produced, you know, so many, you know, artists, so many records. I mean, that's cool, but the truth is that no band has been nominated more than Chic. We've been nominated I think 11 times and not gotten in. And it's weird. So now after they've put me in, Chic no longer gets nominated. And that just feels strange to me because it's funny. So even though this isn't how Bruce and I met, but Bruce, one of the big accomplishments of his career is he signed a band called The Knack, and they did the record called My Sharona. And at the same time My Sharona came out, our record, Good Times, came out. And both records were battling for the #1 spot on the Billboard charts. And everybody was saying how Chic and My Sharona were pitted against each other. Well, the truth of the matter is that the Knack were working on their second album, and they were at Power Station right next door to us, and we would go to lunch with Sharona. Sharona was a real girl, like she's the girlfriend of the guy, and we were not pitted against the Knack at all. They were like our friends. They were right there recording next to us, but the industry made it look like it was the resurgence of rock against disco. The resurgence of rock. The Knack was coming back, and they were gonna rightfully, put, white artists back at the top where they belong, and the black artists and the gay artists and blah, blah, blah will be kicked to the curb. And I'll never forget this. Bernard Edwards, my former partner, we were flying back from London, and we're reading about this disco demolition thing going on in Chicago. And we're like reading, we're like going, wow, what's this about? And we actually didn't take it seriously. We thought it was like wrestling or something. We were like going, okay, that's like a funny, a publicity stunt. It was like when what was the other basketball league? So we had the NBA and then we had the ABA. And so it was like the ABA, when the ABA was going to fuse into the NBA, and they would do all these publicity stunts and all these crazy things. I actually did a movie with Will Ferrell about this.
I was thinking about that movie.
Right. And one of the publicity stunts, right, we wrote, he became a singer called Jackie Moon. He wrote a song called Love Me Sexy.
I was just thinking of that, and you said it. You collaborated with that. You wrote that?
Yeah. And it's funny too, because when we were writing the song, when I was writing the song, what I thought was really funny and brilliant about it, and even Will Ferrell loved it. When we were doing the table read, and he's sitting there and he's all into it. Take off your shoes and let me sexy. There's one bit where I say, I forget the actual lyric, but the backgrounds go, suck, 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 suck me sexy. And when the movie came out, they mixed that part down. I was like going, that's what makes it funny.
Oh my gosh.
But it was like soul glow. I always say that my favorite moments in composing have been writing those funny songs like Just Let Your Soul Glow.
Oh my gosh.
It was like, to me, that was the bomb. That was, I mean, writing Coming to America was fun, but writing Soul Glow was...
You wrote so many songs that I had no idea about. Like, that's iconic. Just in the original Coming to America. That's amazing. That's amazing. Your resume is just so long now.
I hope and my wind is long too. I hope I answered your question, Bruce. I know.
Well,
I went off the rails.
Let me give you like probably one key capping question here. We have a question that says, what advice would you give to a young artist to move their career ahead when they haven't really started? I mean, that's a big question.
It's
so many young people. We're trying to do here is, we're as a music commission trying to give the opportunity and the tools and the guidance with an evening like this and a lot of hands-on stuff, or even starting by putting instruments in the hands of young people, middle schoolers, the elementary school children. But they're all, so many young people today know there's a business of music and they're surrounded by it and it's accessible. So what would you give some pearls of wisdom to the young people that are watching this evening?
I say, if you love it, just keep doing it. Never, ever give up. Never let people. I mean, look at my career. If I backed down and I didn't do the things that I intrinsically believed were the right things to do, I would have never made it. Like, I knew that I had to get on a certain station, but I knew that I couldn't go in the front door. I had to figure out a way to get in the back door.
Mhm.
I was just relentless. And the thing is that you can tell that I love doing it. I haven't had to work since the Diana Ross record. That at that point, I had made enough money in publishing and what have you to never have to work again. But you can see I certainly didn't stop. I love working. I go to work because I'm, as Grace Jones would say, I'm a slave to the rhythm.
Say it in her voice, though.
No.
Slave to the rhythm.
So, the thing is that I think that young people are actually motivated because they see the rewards now in a much more grandiose way than they've ever seen it before. Like when we were younger, it probably wasn't even that cool to flaunt it. You know what I mean? Whereas now it's become a thing. Like I remember in the early days of hip hop. I mean, look, let's take one of my big records. Let's take Rapper's Delight. So it was a big deal. I had a young writer laughing the other day when I was saying that, that my track wound up being the bed for Rapper's Delight because we believed in the breakdown, right? So if you listen to the Good Times, it's got this long breakdown, and plus Sugar Hill Gang actually took our record and scratched it to get our string fall off on their record, which was their big mistake. Because at that point, that copyright infringement, you couldn't lie about that one. It would be just like if I took, like the Star Wars bar scene and made that my music video. It was like, nope, you can't do that. I don't think that George Lucas is going to let you get away with that. So nowadays, I think that because young people see music not only as a way to get out of their situation, because that's what it's always been for us, but we like music. We love music. It's a part of who we are. So if you can better your situation and still really love the thing that you're doing, why wouldn't you choose that? I mean, that's what I did. I didn't think I'd be rich, or I didn't think I'd make it necessarily. I honestly thought that I'd just be, and this would have been a great gig, by the way, when I was a kid, I thought I would just be sitting at some chair in a symphony orchestra. I didn't know which one, but I started out as a flute player, and then I switched from flute to clarinet, and I was pretty good. We were no joke. So I figured that at some point in time, I would land a job with a symphony orchestra. I didn't think I'd get into New York Philharmonic, but when I was a kid, I grew up around Leopold Stokowski and people like that. So maybe I could have gotten to the American Symphony. My manager is going crazy.
Yeah.
Well, let's do this because we don't want to give Merck a coronary, number one. We've kept you almost an hour and a half now. I just want to say, man.
Oh no, Bru, you're my boy.
I
miss you, man. It's totally cool.
I appreciate you doing this. And just to say to everybody out there, particularly the young musicians or people that want to have a career in music, you're hearing it from Nile. I started my career as a kid from the Bronx who parents had to spend $1 a week to get me an instrument, which we couldn't afford. And that if you love something, you'll never go to work. Never. Just to stick by what you're doing. Also, it's another one. Remember, music is like the mafia. Once you get in, you'll never get out.
That's true.
So I wanted to say thanks
The music business we grew up in was the mafia.
Oh, right. Oops. But if you're out there, go to musiccolumbus.com and sign up for free for membership. You get discounts to all kinds of great shops here and business in Columbus. And you get advisories about things like this. And we've got lots of programs. So with that, Nile, I love you, man. Thank you so much. Sean, you're a wonderful host. You saved me from a lot of talking and stumbling over myself.
Well, it was definitely an honor and a pleasure to share this platform with both of you gentlemen. I definitely appreciate that. And I'm sure I could speak for the fans. They will walk away with lots of gems. Now, again, we so appreciate your time. Thank you to the Columbus Music Commission and, of course, Urban One and Magic 95.5. Thank you to the viewers out there for listening or viewing this live virtual panel, Music Business Mondays. I'm Sean Anthony, and thank you so much for tuning in. God bless you all.
Peace out.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean.